The memorial wall stretched for 3 kilometers across the gray surface of Luna Base. Commander walked slowly along its length, her boots making soft sounds against the polished stone floor. The wall was made of black granite, brought from Earth at great cost. On its surface, 4 billion names were carved in letters so small that a person had to lean close to read them. Stopped at a section near the middle. She reached out with her gloved hand and touched a name, Park, her great-grandmother, dead at 32 years old, killed by a disease that came from the stars. 300 years had passed since the plague. 300 years since the Empire had released their biological weapon on Earth. The disease had been cruel and efficient. It attacked the lungs first, then the heart, then the brain. A healthy person could be dead in 6 days. There was no cure that human doctors could find. But there had been a cure. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of 12 alien species, had possessed the medicine that could have saved billions. Earth had begged them for help. Human ambassadors had traveled to Concord stations and pleaded on their knees. They had offered everything: resources, territory, loyalty, servitude. They had offered their pride and their dignity. The Concord had refused. Remembered the history lessons from her childhood. She remembered the recordings of Ambassador standing before the Concord High Council, tears running down his face as he described the death camps, the mass graves, the children dying in their mother's arms. She remembered the cold response from the Concord speaker. Humanity is a primitive species. The resources required to save them would be better spent elsewhere. This is unfortunate, but it is the logical choice. 4 billion people died because they were deemed not worth saving. Pressed her forehead against the cold stone. Even after all these years, the anger was still there, buried deep in her chest like a hot coal that never went cold. "Commander!" She turned. Admiral stood behind her, his hands clasped behind his back. He was an old man now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp and clear. He had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 50 years. His own grandfather had survived the plague, one of the lucky few whose immune systems had fought off the disease. Admiral said, "I was not expecting you." "I know, I apologize for interrupting your remembrance." Walked forward until he stood beside her. He looked at the wall, at the endless names carved into stone. "My grandmother's name is over there," he said, pointing to a section far to the left. "I visit her every year on the anniversary." "As do I," replied. They stood in silence for a long moment. The memorial wall was always quiet. People came here to remember, not to speak. The only sound was the soft hum of the environmental systems keeping the air breathable in the underground chamber. Finally spoke again. "I have news, Commander, news that changes everything." Looked at him, his face was grave, more serious than she had ever seen it. "What has happened?" "The Empire has returned." Felt her blood turn cold. The had disappeared from known space 2 centuries ago, retreating into unexplored regions after their initial conquests. Most people had assumed they were gone forever, perhaps destroyed by some disaster or internal conflict. But humanity had never stopped preparing. They had never stopped building ships and weapons and training soldiers, because humanity never forgot. "Where?" asked. "Everywhere," said. "They have emerged from the outer rim with a fleet larger than anything we have ever recorded. They are attacking conquered worlds across 3 sectors." Felt something strange in her chest. It was not fear. It was something darker, something that tasted like bitter satisfaction. "The conquered," she said slowly. "They are being attacked." "Yes, their fleets are burning. 3 worlds have already fallen. Millions are dead, with millions more expected to follow." Paused. "They have sent a message to Earth. They are asking for our help." For a long moment could not speak. The irony was too great, too painful, too perfect. The same aliens who had watched humanity die, who had calculated human lives against their resources and found them wanting, those aliens were now begging humanity for salvation. "They have nerve," said. "I will give them that." Yes, agreed, they do. What does the council say? The council has not yet decided. There will be a full session tomorrow in Seoul. Every representative will be present. The debate will be fierce. Turn to face her directly. They want you there, Commander. Your voice carries weight. The fleet respects you. The people respect you. Looked back at the wall. 4 billion names. 4 billion people who had trusted that the galaxy would help them, that advanced civilizations would show basic compassion, that suffering would be answered with kindness. They had been wrong. Why should we care? Asked. The question came out harder than she intended, sharp and cold. Why should we spend human lives to save people who let our ancestors die? Let them taste what we tasted. Let them know what it feels like to cry out for help and receive only silence. Did not answer immediately. He stood beside her, looking at the names on the wall. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I asked myself the same question, he said. For many years I believed that we should let them burn, that it would be justice, that our ancestors would approve. He reached out and touched the wall. But then I thought about what my grandmother would have wanted. She was a doctor, you know. She worked in the emergency camps during the plague, trying to save people even when there was no medicine. She died with her patients. A hero said. Yes, a hero, lowered his hand. She did not become a doctor for revenge. She became a doctor because she believed that suffering should be answered with help, not with more suffering. That was what made her human. The conquered is not human, said. They proved that when they abandoned us. You are right, said. They are not human, but we are. He turned and began walking toward the exit. The question is not what they deserve, Commander. The question is who we want to be. He paused at the doorway and looked back at her. We remember what it felt like to be abandoned, he said. We remember the silence when we screamed for help. We remember every single name on that wall. He gestured at the black granite stretching into the distance. We can use that memory to become like them, cold, calculating, willing to let billions die because it is the logical choice, or we can use it to become something better. He left her alone with the wall. Stood there for a long time, surrounded by the names of the dead. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had died afraid and alone while the stars watched in silence. She thought about the conquered, who had measured human lives against their convenience and found them worthless. She thought about the who had created a weapon designed to murder entire species. And she thought about what it meant to be human. When she finally left the memorial, her decision was made. She did not know if it was the right choice. She did not know if her ancestors would approve, but she knew what she had to do. Because humanity remembered. And humanity would not let that memory turn them into monsters. The United Council Chamber in Seoul was the largest meeting hall on Earth. It had been built 50 years after the plague, when humanity finally had enough strength to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. The ceiling rose 30 meters high, supported by columns of white stone. The walls were covered with murals showing the history of human space exploration, the first moon landing, the first Mars colony, the first ships leaving the solar system. But the largest mural was at the back of the chamber. It showed Earth as seen from space, half the planet covered in darkness. That darkness represented the death zones where the plague had killed so many people that the land was left empty for decades. Today, every seat in the chamber was filled. 300 representatives from every nation on Earth sat in curved rows facing a central platform. Cameras broadcast the proceedings to billions of viewers across the planet and throughout human space. This was the most important debate in 300 years. Counselor stood at the central platform, her voice echoing through the silent hall. She was 60 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her family had lost 11 members to the plague. That loss had shaped her entire life. We all know why we are here, she said. The Galactic Conquered has asked for our help. The same Galactic Conquered that watched our ancestors die. The same Galactic Conquered that called humanity expendable. The same galactic concord that decided our lives were not worth the cost of medicine. She paused, letting her words settle into the silence. Now they are dying. The Empire has returned and their worlds are burning. Their fleets are scattered. Their people are running in fear. His voice grew harder. And they come to us. They come to the species they abandoned. They come to the primitives who were not worth saving. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Many of the representatives nodded in agreement. I say let them burn, continued. I say let them taste what we tasted. Let them cry out for help and hear only silence. Let them bury their dead in mass graves and wonder why the universe is so cruel. Her hands gripped the podium. That is not revenge. That is justice. That is balance. They made a choice 300 years ago. Now they must live with the results of that choice. She stepped back from the podium. The chamber erupted in applause from at least half the representatives. The sound was like thunder rolling through the hall. Commander watched from the military section, her face expressionless. Beside her, Admiral sat with his eyes closed, listening. The next speaker was Counselor. He was younger than perhaps 45, with a round face and kind eyes. He was known as a moderate voice in the council, someone who tried to find common ground between opposing sides. Counselor speaks with passion, began. She speaks for the anger that many of us feel, that all of us feel. He walked slowly across the platform. My own family lost 17 people to the plague. My great-uncle was a teacher who died in his classroom, surrounded by his students. None of them survived. The chamber was quiet now. So yes, I understand the desire for justice. I understand the satisfaction that would come from watching the conquered suffer as we suffered. I understand the temptation to say that they deserve everything they receive. Stopped walking and faced the assembly directly. But I must ask a question. If we abandon the conquered today, what does that make us? If we watch billions die because we have decided they are not worth saving, how are we different from them? We are different because they abandoned us first, someone called out from the crowd. Are we? Replied. Or are we just using their crime as an excuse for our own? The conquered had reasons for their choice. They calculated costs and benefits. They decided that helping us was not efficient. They had logic and explanations and justifications. He shook his head. If we abandon them, we will also have reasons. We will also have logic and explanations. We will tell ourselves that it is justice, that it is balance, that they deserve it. He paused. But when the last conquered world burns, when the last conquered child dies crying for help that never comes, we will have become exactly what we hated. We will have become them. The chamber was divided now. Some representatives nodded at its words. Others shook their heads in disagreement. The next speaker was Dr., the head of Earth's Xenobiology Institute. She was a small woman with silver-streaked black hair and tired eyes. She had spent her entire career studying alien diseases and developing cures. Her grandfather had been part of the team that finally created a vaccine for the plague 20 years too late to save most of the victims. I am not here to talk about justice or revenge, said. I am here to talk about facts. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. This is data we have gathered from conquered transmissions over the past week. The display showed images of weapons in action, entire cities reduced to rubble, biological agents spreading through populations, medical facilities overwhelmed with dying patients. The bioweapons have evolved, explained. They are more advanced than what they used against Earth, more deadly, more efficient. Our models suggest that if they are not stopped, 12 species will be completely extinct within 10 years, 12 entire civilizations gone forever. She changed the display to show a map of known space. They are not just attacking the conquered. They are testing their weapons, improving them, preparing for larger conquests. Today it is the conquered. Tomorrow it could be the outer colonies. The day after that, it could be Earth itself. Counselor spoke from her seat. We have defended ourselves before. We can defend ourselves again. Can we? Asked. Against an enemy that has spent 2 centuries developing weapons specifically designed to destroy entire species. Against an enemy that now controls conquered technology and resources. She shook her head. Perhaps, but at what cost? How many human lives would be lost in that war? The chamber fell silent. There is another option, continued. We can fight the now while they are focused on the conquered. We can stop them before they become unstoppable. We can save billions of lives, conquered lives, yes, but also human lives that would be lost in a future war. She deactivated the display. I am not asking you to forgive the conquered. I am not asking you to forget what they did. I am asking you to consider what is practical, what is smart, what gives humanity the best chance of survival. She looked around the chamber. We can let our anger guide us, or we can let our wisdom guide us. The choice is yours. The debate continued for 6 more hours. Speaker after speaker took the platform. Some argued for intervention. Others argued for isolation. Some wept as they talked about family members lost to the plague. Others showed calculations and projections about military strategy. When the vote was finally called, Commander watched the numbers appear on the main display. The chamber held its breath. The result was close, closer than anyone had expected. 153 votes for intervention, 147 votes against. Humanity would fight, not for revenge, not for gratitude, not because the conquered deserved help. Humanity would fight because that was who they chose to be. As the chamber erupted in noise, cheers from some, protests from others, Admiral leaned over too. It is done, he said. Now the real work begins. Nodded, she thought about the memorial wall on Luna, about the 4 billion names carved in stone. She thought about her great-grandmother, dead at 32. I hope they were watching, she said quietly. I hope they understand. Put a hand on her shoulder. They understand, he said. They were human too. The planet Prime was dying. From orbit, the destruction was visible even without magnification. Great columns of smoke rose from cities that had stood for 10,000 years. The oceans near the coastlines had turned dark with debris. Flashes of light marked where weapons continued to fall, each flash representing thousands of lives ending in an instant. The fleet surrounded the planet like a swarm of metal insects, 200 warships, each one bristling with weapons. They had arrived 3 days ago and had been methodically destroying everything on the surface ever since. The conquered defense fleet had been shattered in the first hour of battle. The survivors had retreated to the far side of the planet's moon, too damaged to fight, too proud to run. On the bridge of the conquered flagship, Ambassador watched his burn. He was an old creature, his blue skin wrinkled with age, his 4 eyes dim with exhaustion and grief. He had served the conquered for 80 years. He had believed in their mission of peace and cooperation. He had believed that logic and reason could solve any problem. Now he watched as everything he believed in turned to ash. Ambassador, one of his officers said, we are detecting new contacts emerging from fold space. Did not look away from the burning planet. More. No, sir, the energy signatures are different. They are. The officer paused, checking his instruments. They are human. Turned slowly. For a moment he could not process what he had heard. Human. The species that the conquered had abandoned 3 centuries ago. The species that they had deemed too primitive, too costly, too expendable to save. How many ships? Asked. The officer's voice was barely a whisper. 300, sir, and more are arriving. The shifted to show the human fleet emerging from fold space. Ship after ship appeared in flashes of blue light, taking formation with a precision that spoke of years of training and preparation. They were not like the elegant, curved vessels of the conquered. They were angular, aggressive, built for war. Their hulls were painted black, and each one bore a name written in white letters. Read the names as the ships passed: Remembrance, Grief, Lagos Eternal, Rising, Mumbai's Children, New York Fallen. He understood then. These were not just names. They were memorials. Every ship in the human fleet was named for a city that had suffered during the plague that the conquered had refused to cure. The humans had never forgotten, and now they had come. Captain stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, humanity's flagship. He was 42 years old, with short gray hair and a scar across his left cheek from a training accident years ago. He had joined the fleet at 18, driven by stories his grandmother had told him about the plague years. She had been 5 years old when the sickness came. She had watched her parents die. She had survived only because a stranger had carried her to a refugee camp and left her there. That stranger had never been identified. His grandmother had spent her entire life trying to find out who had saved her, but she never succeeded. The chaos of those years had swallowed all records. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "fleet is changing formation. They are turning to face us." "Good," said, "let them come." "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the conquered flagship." "Put it through." Ambassador's face appeared on the. He looked broken, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and shame. "Human vessel," said, "this is Ambassador of the Galactic Conquered. We did not expect you to come." "No," replied, "I imagine you did not." "Why?" The word seemed to cost tremendous effort. "After what we did, after how we treated your people, why would you help us?" Was silent for a moment. He thought about his grandmother, about the stranger who had saved her life, about all the names carved on the memorial wall. He thought about the debates he had watched on the news, about the vote that had passed by only 6 voices. "Because someone should have come for us," finally said, "and no one did. We remember that. We remember it every single day." He leaned forward in his chair. "So we came for you, not because you deserve it, not because we have forgiven you. We came because that is who we are." Before could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the Remembrance. The fleet was attacking. "All ships engage," ordered. "Protect the planet, stop the bombardment." The human fleet surged forward. For 3 centuries, humanity had prepared for this moment. After the plague, after the abandonment, after the years of rebuilding, Earth's leaders had made a decision. They would never be weak again. They would never be at the mercy of others again. They would build a fleet that could challenge any power in the galaxy. And so they had. Human ships moved with coordinated precision, their weapons systems firing in synchronized patterns that they had never encountered. The fleet was larger, but they had expected to face a broken, conquered defense force, not a fully prepared human armada. The battle was brutal. Human ships exploded in bursts of fire. Vessels cracked and broke apart under concentrated attacks. Debris filled the space between the 2 fleets, creating a deadly cloud of metal and radiation. Captain watched the tactical display as his fleet pushed forward. They were taking losses, but they were inflicting worse. The bombardment of Prime had stopped as the enemy ships were forced to defend themselves. "Sir," his communications officer said, "the conquered survivors are asking permission to join the battle." Nodded, "Granted. Tell them to support our flanks." The damaged conquered ships emerged from behind the moon, their weapons weak but their aim true. They fought alongside humans for the first time in history, united against a common enemy. The battle raged for 6 hours. By the end, the fleet was broken. 80 of their ships had been destroyed and the rest were retreating into fold space. Human losses were significant, 43 ships lost, 12,000 sailors dead, but the planet was saved. As the last vessel fled, Captain opened a channel to the conquered flagship. "Ambassador," he said, "Prime is secure. Medical ships are on their way to assist with surface casualties." Appeared on screen again. His expression had changed. The shame was still there, but now there was something else, wonder perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Captain said, "I must ask again, why? Your people have every reason to hate us, every reason to want us dead. Why did you come?" looked at the burning planet on his. Even now, smoke rose from ruined cities. Millions were dead, but millions more were alive because humanity had chosen to fight. 300 years ago, said, my ancestors begged for help. They offered everything they had. They offered their dignity, their pride, their freedom, and your people looked at them and decided they were not worth saving. Lowered his eyes. Yes, we did. My grandmother survived the plague, continued. A stranger saved her life. She never knew who it was. She never got to thank them, but she taught me something important. She taught me that kindness does not require an audience, that mercy does not require gratitude, that doing the right thing is its own reward. He stood from his chair and walked closer to the. We did not come because you asked. We did not come because we forgave you. We came because we remember what it felt like to be alone, to be abandoned, to be told that we were not worth saving. His voice was hard but steady. We came because someone should have come for us, and we refused to become what you were. Was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. What do you want from us, Captain? Reparations, apologies, territory? Shook his head. We want you to remember, he said. Remember what happened today. Remember who came when you called for help. Remember that humanity, the species you abandoned, the primitives you left to die, we are the ones who saved you. He turned back to his command chair. Remember and never forget. The transmission ended. The human fleet began organizing rescue and medical operations. There was still much work to do. But the first battle was over, and humanity had shown the galaxy exactly who they were. 3 years of war. Lieutenant had stopped counting the battles after the first 100. She had stopped counting the friends she had lost after the first 20. Now she simply fought, moving from one burning world to the next, carrying her rifle and her memories, and the weight of everything humanity had chosen to bear. The war against the Empire had spread across 3 sectors of the galaxy. Human fleets fought alongside conquered forces on a dozen fronts. The alliance was uneasy at first, built on necessity rather than trust. But as the months passed, as soldiers bled together and died together, something changed. Respect began to grow where there had been only resentment. Had seen it happen in her own unit. When the war began, the conquered soldiers assigned to her battalion had been nervous around the humans. They had expected hatred, expected revenge, expected to be treated as the descendants of those who had abandoned Earth. Instead, they found professional soldiers who cared only about winning the war. Now, 3 years later, those same conquered soldiers followed without question. They had learned that humans did not forget, but they had also learned that humans kept their word. Today stood on the surface of Prime, of the enemy. The final battle was over. The fleets had been destroyed. Their armies had surrendered. Their empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was finished. The capital city lay in ruins around her, not from human weapons. They had destroyed their own city rather than let it be captured. The fires still burned, sending columns of black smoke into the purple sky. Bodies lay in the streets, soldiers who had chosen death over surrender. Lieutenant, one of her soldiers called. We found him. Followed the voice to a collapsed building near the center of the city. Her team had cleared the rubble to reveal an underground bunker. Inside, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guards, sat General. He was old, older than had expected. His scales, which had once been deep green, had faded to a sickly gray. His eyes, large and yellow, were dim with exhaustion. He wore a military uniform covered in medals and decorations, each one representing a victory over some conquered species. One of those medals was for the plague, for the murder of 4 billion humans. Entered the bunker slowly, her rifle raised. Her soldiers spread out behind her, covering every angle. The conquered troops who had fought beside her stayed at the entrance, watching. Looked up as she approached, his lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. Human, he said, His voice was weak but still held a note of contempt. "So you are the ones who brought down my empire?" "Yes," replied. "You should have stayed dead." Coughed, and dark blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was wounded, perhaps mortally. The plague was supposed to end you. You were supposed to be a lesson to the galaxy, proof that the weak perish and the strong survive. "We survived," said. "Yes, you survived." His eyes narrowed. "But why are you here? Why did you fight for the conquered? They left you to die. They watched your ancestors suffer and did nothing. You should hate them as much as you hate us." Did not answer immediately. She looked at the old general, at the monster who had ordered the deaths of billions. She thought about her own family history, about the great-great-grandparents who had died choking on their own blood while alien ships watched from orbit. "You do not understand us," she finally said. "You never did." "Then explain." Leaned forward, genuine curiosity in his dying eyes. "Explain why you saved your enemies. Explain why you showed mercy to those who showed you none." Lowered her rifle. She walked close enough to see the fear hidden beneath his arrogance. He was dying, and he knew it. He had expected humans to execute him on the spot, to give him a warrior's death. He had not expected this. 300 years ago," said, "your plague killed 4 billion of my people. The conquered had the cure and refused to share it. They calculated our lives against their resources and decided we were not worth saving." "Yes," said, "a logical choice. Resources are limited, value must be assessed." "That is what you believe," continued. "That is what the conquered believed. Life is a resource. Suffering is acceptable if the numbers work out. Mercy is weakness." She crouched down so that she was at eye level with the dying general. "But we believe something different. We believe that suffering matters, that every life has value that cannot be calculated, that mercy is not weakness, it is strength. It is the choice to be better than those who hurt us." Stared at her. "Foolishness, sentiment, it will make you weak." "It made us strong enough to defeat you," replied. "It made us strong enough to rebuild after the plague. It made us strong enough to come here and end your empire while the species you despised watched and followed our lead." She stood up and gestured to her medics. "Treat his wounds. Stabilize him for transport." Her soldiers stared at her in surprise. One of them, a young man named, stepped forward. "Lieutenant, are you sure? This is General. He created the plague. He murdered billions of people, our people." "I know who he is," said, "and I know what he did. He will answer for his crimes, but he will answer in a courtroom, not in a bunker. He will face trial. He will hear the evidence against him. He will have a chance to defend himself, even though he gave none of his victims that chance." "Why?" asked. "Why give him anything he does not deserve?" Looked at the young soldier. He was 22 years old, born long after the plague, but the anger was still there. It was passed down through generations, kept alive by stories and memorials and names carved in stone. "Because killing him makes us executioners," she said. "A trial makes us civilized. That is the difference between us and them." She turned to the conquered soldiers at the entrance. They were watching with wide eyes, struggling to understand what they were seeing. One of them, an officer named Telos who had fought beside for 2 years, stepped forward. "Lieutenant," Telos said, "my people abandoned yours. We left you to die, and yet you show mercy to the one who tried to destroy you both." "Yes," said simply. "I do not understand." Smiled, though there was no happiness in it. "You will," she said. "Someday you will." The medics began treating General. He watched them with confusion, unable to comprehend why his enemies were saving his life. He had spent his entire existence believing that the universe was a competition, that only the strong survived, that mercy was a flaw to be exploited. And now he was being shown that he was wrong. 3 days later was transported to a neutral station to await trial. The proceedings would take months, perhaps years. Witnesses would testify. Evidence would be presented. The crimes of the empire would be documented for history. In the end, was found guilty. He spent the rest of his life in a prison cell, surrounded by the testimonies of those he had tried to destroy. But he lived. He lived because humanity chose to let him live, because humanity refused to become what they had fought against. The war was over. 40 million humans had died in 3 years of fighting. 100 colonies bore the scars of battle. The cost of mercy had been enormous. But when the histories were written, when the stories were told to future generations, one fact stood above all others. Humanity had won not through cruelty, but through choice. They had chosen to be better, and that choice had changed the galaxy forever. The Great Assembly Hall had been rebuilt 3 times in its history. The first version had been destroyed by an asteroid impact. The second had burned during an ancient civil war. The third stood now on the neutral station of, orbiting a dying star at the edge of known space. Admiral stood at the entrance to the hall, looking up at its massive doors. They were made of crystallized metal, polished until they reflected light like mirrors. Through them, she could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices, representatives from every species in the galactic Concord, gathering to discuss the future. She was 68 years old now. 3 decades had passed since she had stood before the memorial wall on Luna, touching her great-grandmother's name and wondering whether humanity should help those who had abandoned them. Admiral had died in the Battle of the Nebula, leading the charge that had broken the Second Fleet. She had been promoted to take his place. Now she was here, at the invitation of the Concord, to speak about what came next. Admiral, a young officer approached Captain, the same soldier who had questioned Lieutenant's decision to spare General. He had risen through the ranks quickly, driven by the same determination that had carried humanity through the war. "They are ready for you." Nodded, "Then let us not keep them waiting." The doors opened, and she walked into the great assembly hall. It was enormous. The ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into shadow. The walls curved inward like the inside of an egg, covered with screens that showed the faces of representatives who were attending remotely from distant worlds. In the center of the hall was a raised platform, surrounded by tiered seating that held the physical delegates. Every species in the Concord was represented. Recognized many of them from intelligence briefings. The tall, blue-skinned who had refused to share the plague cure. The Kith who had voted to classify humanity as non-essential. The crystalline makers who had designed the medical technology that could have saved billions but had chosen not to deploy it. They watched her as she walked to the central platform. Their eyes held a mixture of emotions: respect, fear, shame, curiosity. 3 years ago, they had expected humanity to die in obscurity. Now humans stood as the strongest military power in known space. Climbed the steps to the platform and faced the assembly. The hall fell silent. "Distinguished representatives," she began. Her voice was calm and clear, amplified by the hall's systems to reach every corner. "I have been asked to address this assembly on behalf of humanity. I have been asked to discuss the future of the Galactic Concord and our place within it." She paused, looking around the hall. "But before I speak of the future, I must speak of the past." The silence deepened. Every delegate knew what was coming. 300 years ago, a plague struck Earth. 4 billion of my people died. They died in agony, choking on their own blood, watching their families fall beside them. They died calling out for help that never came. His voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it. "You had the cure, you had the ships, you had the resources, and you chose to let us die. You calculated our lives against your convenience and found us wanting. You called us primitives, you called us expendable. You said that saving us would cost too much." The delegation lowered their eyes. The Kith representatives clicked their mandibles in nervous patterns. The Maker's crystals dimmed with what might have been shame. "We could have become like you," continued. "When you came to us for help when they were burning your worlds and slaughtering your people, we could have refused. We could have watched you die as you watched us. We could have called it justice. Many of my people wanted exactly that." She let the words hang in the air. "But we chose differently. Not because we forgave you, we have not. Perhaps we never will. We chose to help because suffering is not a currency to be traded. It is not leverage. It is not a weapon to be used against those who wronged us." Stepped forward, closer to the front row of delegates. "We came because no one came for us, and we remember how that felt. We remember the silence when our ancestors screamed for help. We remember every single name carved on the memorial wall. We will never forget." Her eyes swept across the assembly. "And we will spend eternity making sure the galaxy never forgets either." The hall was completely still. Not a single delegate moved. "You have invited us here to join your conquered, to take our place among the great powers of the galaxy, to help rebuild what the war destroyed." His voice softened slightly. "We accept this invitation, but we have conditions." A murmur rippled through the hall. Ambassador, older now but still serving his people, rose from his seat. "Name them, Admiral. After what humanity has done for us, we will listen." Nodded. "First, the conquered will be reformed. Its charter will be rewritten. The old principles, efficiency, calculation, the weighing of lives against resources, these will be abandoned. In their place, we will establish a new principle, that all suffering matters, that all life has value, that no species will ever again be left to die because they are deemed unworthy of help." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. These new principles challenged everything the conquered had believed for. Second, the memorial wall on Luna will be designated a protected site. Representatives from every conquered species will visit it at least once during their term of service. They will read the names. They will understand what abandonment looks like. More murmurs, but no objections. Third, and most important, we will create a rapid response force, crewed by soldiers from all species, trained to answer distress calls from any world in need. When a plague strikes, when a disaster falls, when any people cry out for help, this force will respond. No calculations, no debates, no decisions about whether the victims are worth saving. His voice rose, filling the hall. "We will build a galaxy where no one dies alone, where no one is left behind, where the strong protect the weak and the healthy help the sick, and no child ever has to watch their parents die while the stars look down in silence." She stopped, the silence stretched on. Then slowly, Ambassador rose to his feet. He placed his hand over his heart, a human gesture of respect that he had learned during the war. "Admiral," he said, "on behalf of the people, I support these conditions. We have learned much from humanity in these past years. We have learned that our logic was flawed, that our calculations were missing something essential." His voice cracked slightly. "We have learned what it means to be saved by those we abandoned. We will not forget." One by one, other delegates rose. The kith stood in their strange, multi-legged way. The Maker's crystals brightened with agreement. Species after species added their voices to the chorus. The vote was called. It passed unanimously. The Galactic Conquered was reformed that day. Its new charter was built on principles that humans had carried through centuries of suffering, principles written in Korean on the memorial wall and translated into 10,000 languages for the galaxy to read. The words were simple. Remember and never look away again. 500 years later, a young alien student visited the memorial wall on Luna. She was from a species that had not existed during the plague, born on a world that had been colonized after the war. She had learned about the plague in school, but seeing the wall in person was different. 4 billion names stretched across the gray lunar surface, carved in letters so small she had to lean close to read them. Each name represented a life lost. Each name was a reminder. Her guide was an old human veteran named. He had served in the peacekeeping forces for 40 years, helping to enforce the new Conquered's principles across the galaxy. Now he spent his retirement giving tour at the memorial. Did they ever apologize? The student asked. The conquered species who abandoned Earth, did they say they were sorry? Smiled. It was a tired smile, but not bitter. Some did, he said. Most did not. It does not matter anymore. Then why keep the wall? Why make every conquered representative visit? Why hold on to the memory? Looked up at the name stretching toward the horizon. The sun was setting behind the earth, casting long shadows across the memorial. Because forgetting is easy, he said. Remembering is a choice, and choices are what make us who we are. The student was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and touched one of the names. Park. A woman who had died 300 years before the student was born, on a planet the student had never seen. What happened to her? The student asked. I do not know, admitted. Most of their stories are lost. We know only their names and that they died. That seems sad. It is sad, agreed. But it is also important. She was a person. She had a life, a family, hopes and dreams. And she died because the galaxy decided she was not worth saving. He put a gentle hand on the student's shoulder. We keep her name so that no one ever makes that decision again. The student nodded slowly. She understood now why the memorial existed, why the new conquered required visits, why humanity had built their entire civilization around the principle of remembrance. Suffering mattered, every life had value, and the galaxy would never forget. That was humanity's gift to the universe, not their technology, not their military strength, not their economic power. Their gift was simpler and more profound. The knowledge that mercy was possible, that compassion was strength, and that choosing to help those who had wronged you was the highest form of victory. They forgot our suffering, humanity did not. And because humanity remembered, the galaxy learned to remember too.